What if little David had not only thrown a stone at Goliath, but also made him run away holding his head? Imagine the winter of 1939. The snow squeaks under your boots, and Finland, a tiny country with a population barely larger than modern Kiev, not only resists the huge Red Army, but smashes it to pieces. Yes, imagine that Finland won the Winter War, not just survived, but forced Stalin to bite his elbows and rewrite his plans on a napkin in the Kremlin. Does it sound like a fantasy? But let's play this game of what if and see where this alternative history takes us. The Winter War is not just a page in a textbook, but a real thriller where the directors of history have clearly overdone the drama. Imagine this. The Soviet Union, which has just signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, decides that Finland is a kind of appetizing appetizer before a big geopolitical feast. And Finland, with its forests, lakes, and soldiers who seem to have been born with skis on their feet, says, "Well, try it." And so the play begins. Tanks get bogged down in the snow, Soviet generals swear, and Finnish snipers disappear into the forest like ghosts. In real history, Finland lost, but retained its independence, losing part of its territory. But what if things had gone differently? What if the Finnish sissies, yes, that's their spirit of stubbornness, not what you think, had seen things through? This topic is interesting because it makes us think. What if a small player on the chessboard of history had suddenly said checkmate? How would the world have changed if Finland had not only withstood, but had embarrassed the Soviet Union? This is not just entertainment for history buffs, but also a reason to look at the modern world and ask, what if things had turned out differently? What follows is a story that will make you want to pour another cup of coffee, put down your phone, and plunge into an alternative reality. Are you ready? Then hold on, because we're going to snowy Finland, where the story takes a different turn than we're used to. Why is it worth listening to? Because we're not just going to tell you the facts. We will analyze how a single shift could have redrawn the map of Europe, how Finnish farmers with rifles could have changed the course of World War II, and maybe even joke about Stalin sitting in his office nervously chewing on his phone when he learned that his army was mired in the snow. It will be fun, a little ironic, but most importantly, you won't be able to tear yourself away. So sit back and let's pretend that Finland has not only survived, but has kicked ass. So let's go back to November 1939. The Soviet Union, confident in its strength, throws an army at Finland that exceeds the entire population of this country. But something goes wrong. In real history, Finland put up a heroic fight, but eventually succumbed to the pressure. In our alternate reality, the Finnish troops, led by Carl Gustaf Mannerheim, do the impossible. They not only hold off the attack, but launch a counteroffensive. How? Thanks to several key points that we will now analyze. First, Finnish snipers such as Simo Heiha, nicknamed White Death, become not just a legend, but a real machine for demoralizing the enemy. Imagine, Soviet soldiers are afraid to leave their tents because every rustle in the forest could mean that Heiha has already taken aim. In our story, Simo and his comrades not only shoot the enemy, but also disrupt the logistics, destroying officers and command posts. The Soviet army, already suffering from poor planning, begins to fall apart. Secondly, the Finnish tactic of motii, encircling and destroying the enemy in the forests, works like a Swiss watch. In reality, it caused huge losses to the Red Army, but in our history, the Finns have perfected it to the level of art. They don't just cut off Soviet units, but capture their equipment, ammunition, and even canned food. They say that Finnish soldiers were not happy with Soviet stew, but it was not wasted. Imagine Soviet generals reporting to Stalin, "Comrade, we've lost another regiment, and the Finns are now riding our tanks." Stalin would probably have hung up on them. Third, international support. In the real story, Finland received only limited assistance, but in our version, the West, frightened by the aggressiveness of the USSR, decides that it is better to support little Finland than to deal with an angry Stalin. Sweden, which in reality remained neutral, sends volunteers and weapons. Britain and France, instead of empty promises, supplied airplanes and artillery. Even the United States, which had not yet entered the war, decided that Finland was a great example for anti-Soviet propaganda and sent humanitarian aid in the form of rifles and warm overcoats. As a result, by the spring of 1940, Finland not only holds out, but strikes so hard that the Red Army retreats, leaving the Karelian Isthmus. And now the key point. In May 1940, Finland signed a peace treaty, not as a defeated party, but as a triumphant one. The USSR, humiliated and forced to save resources before the inevitable war with Germany, agrees to Finland's terms. The Karelian Isthmus remains Finnish, and the USSR pays reparations. Yes, imagine Stalin signing a check for reparations. It would have been an epic moment. But this is only the beginning. How does the world change after such a victory? First of all, Finland becomes a symbol of resistance. Its victory inspires other small countries, which see that even a giant can be brought to its knees if you have smart tactics and a little bit of chutzpah. In the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, partisan movements against the Soviet occupation begin. In Poland, which had just been divided between the USSR and Germany, the underground movement was getting a new impetus. Finland, by the way, becomes a center for refugees and anti-Soviet activists, and Helsinki turns into a kind of freedom hub in Northern Europe. Secondly, the Soviet Union is losing credibility. Stalin, who looked invincible in real history, now seems vulnerable. Internal strife begins within the USSR. Generals accuse each other of failure, and the NKVD organizes purges that further weaken the army. This has huge consequences when Hitler attacks the USSR in 1941. The Red Army, which in real history put up a heroic fight, is less prepared in our version because the defeat in Finland has undermined its morale and logistics. Germany advances faster, but at the same time, Finland, emboldened by its victory, refuses to ally with Hitler. In real history, it was forced to cooperate with Germany because of the threat from the Soviet Union. Instead, Finland chose neutrality, but with a tilt toward the West, becoming a bridge between Scandinavia and the Allies. Third, the geopolitical map of Europe is changing. Sweden, inspired by Finland's success, abandons complete neutrality and begins to actively cooperate with Western allies. Norway, which in real history was occupied by Germany, receives more support from Finland and Sweden, which complicates the German offensive in Scandinavia. As a result, Northern Europe becomes a strong anti-Nazi and anti-Soviet bastion. Finland, by the way, begins to export not only wood and fish, but also its military tactics. American and British officers come to Helsinki to learn how to fight in winter conditions. Who knows, maybe in this reality, American soldiers in the Korean War wear Finnish skis instead of their bulky boots. What about culture? Finland is becoming a symbol of heroism, and this is reflected in art. Hollywood is making movies about the White Death and Finnish partisans, with stars like Gary Cooper playing the main characters. In Europe, there is a fashion for Finnish music, literature, and even saunas. Yes, imagine London gentlemen in the 1940s soaking in saunas, calling it Finnish spirit. The Finnish language, which used to be exotic, is now being studied in European universities because if these guys defeated Stalin, then their language is definitely worthy of attention. But the most interesting thing is how this affects the present. In our alternative reality, Finland becomes a technological and economic leader much earlier. Instead of recovering from the war, it invests reparations in education and industry. Nokia, which in the real story became a giant in the 1990s, in this reality launches the first mobile phone in the 1970s. Imagine, while Americans are bragging about their bulky Motorola's, Finnish school children are already exchanging text messages. Finland is also becoming a leader in green technologies because, as they would joke in Helsinki, if we defeated the Red Army, we can handle global warming. But what about the world at large? The Soviet defeat in Finland weakens the communist movement in Europe. The Cold War, if it begins, looks different. The West is stronger, and the USSR has to invest more in propaganda to restore its image. Perhaps the Berlin Wall does not appear because Eastern European countries, inspired by Finland, resist Soviet influence more. And who knows, maybe in this reality, we all drink Finnish coffee instead of Starbucks and listen to Finnish rock instead of the Beatles. So what do we have? In a world where Finland has won the Winter War, Europe looks like a tough nut to crack, not so easy for either Stalin or Hitler. Finland, this small country with a big heart, becomes not just a player on the chessboard of history, but a real queen that changes the course of the whole game. The Soviet Union, humiliated and weakened, loses its luster, and the West, inspired by the Finnish example, acts more decisively. The Cold War, if it happens, is more like a cold shower for the USSR than a global confrontation. And we moderns may be living in a world where Nokia rules the tech market, Saunas are in every backyard, and Finnish sissy tactics are taught in business schools as an example of how a small team can defeat a giant. This alternative history makes us wonder, how can a tiny change in the past turn the whole world upside down? In reality, Finland did not win, but its resistance became a legend. And this reminds us that history is not just a set of dates and events, but a web where one wrong step can change everything. Perhaps we should thank the Finnish soldiers for showing the world that size is not the most important thing, even if they lost. Or, as they would joke in Helsinki, the main thing is to be able to ski and not be afraid of the cold. What does this story say about us? That even in the darkest times, a small but stubborn player can change the rules of the game. And that history is not something frozen, but a living thing that could look completely different if someone once said, "Let's try something different." So let's think together. If Finland had won, would we be drinking Finnish coffee today? Would everyone be wearing Finnish beanie hats? And would everyone have a Nokia phone with the Victory 1940 logo in their pocket? If you enjoyed immersing yourself in this alternative reality, please like the video. It's like saying Cece to our story. Subscribe so that you don't miss new stories about how history could have turned. Write in the comments what you would add to this world. Maybe a Finnish rock festival instead of Woodstock, or a monument to Simo Hyuha in every city. Let's figure out together what would have happened if history had taken a different path. See you in the next story.